I can get the
Uh,
menu.
Good afternoon and a very warm welcome from my side, from our office in St. Pölten, where our EcoPlus headquarters is located. My name is Sardar Arslan and I work at EcoPlus International as project manager for expat and relocation service. Today on our webinar, we have an important topic, renting and housing in Austria, and two very important guests. First, a real estate agent, Mr. Ahmet Turan Damar, and he's not only providing houses and flats, but also offers tailor-made services to expats and diplomats. And Miss Magdalena Brandstätter from Dorda Attorneys. Magdalena is a lawyer and specialist in real estate and tenant law, and is known for her expertise and in real estate transactions. And she will introduce and explain you to the Austrian tenant law, and will point out important subjects regarding your rights and responsibilities, and also important points about Austrian real estate market. Before leaving this stage to both of our experts, I also want to use this chance to introduce you EcoPlus International shortly. So who are we? We are EcoPlus International, the internationalization agency of the region Lower Austria in German. It's called in German Niederösterreich, and I am your contact person for expat and relocation service. We help and support Lower Austrian companies, institutions, and their high qualified international workers like you. Please have a look on our website after the webinar. There are very useful information for you. Our service is free of charge, so you can contact us if you have any question about, let's say, red card from first application to extension to plus card for you or your family, housing, schooling, or kindergarten, but also topics like health system, insurance, or tax system. You can also contact us except those subjects if you have any other topics where we can help and guide you to, on the right way. Our aim is that you have as smooth working life as possible here in Austria and feel yourself here comfortable. We also have a focus on socializing events, since it might be a little bit difficult to make new friends in a new country. That's why we organize meetups, regular tables in different parts of Lower Austria. We come together with other internationals from different countries, cultures, languages, and share our experience about daily subjects and find solutions and suggestions. As mentioned, we organize also some activities at weekend where you can participate also with your family. We are trekking tours with professional guides, visiting a regional wine house together, or some common sport activities like bowling or football. For June, we are planning to organize on a weekend again a hiking tour with a wine tasting, but we will let you know and invite you once we finalize the planning. We have already prepared some useful information on our website so that you can understand the structure in Austria better, and a glossary which you will need and use once you start to search a new flat or a house. I am posting it in the chat room, the link from our website regarding housing, but also the link for our newsletter and to follow us on LinkedIn. If you take a short time for the registration to our newsletter or follow us on LinkedIn, we can inform you about important subjects and you get the information about our event and meetups. So I will post the links in the chat room. You don't have to do it now, but you can do it also after the webinar. So I prepared a short opinion poll. Let me try it. 3 really very basic questions to understand you and your demand better. First question is, in which part of Austria do you live now? So let's have a 30-second time that you answer this question. I'm also going to give you an answer. because it's important for us to understand your demand and where you are living and what kind of support we can offer you, so that we can apply our services in a better way. It's more or less most of the people are living in Niederösterreich, but also a lot of people are living in Vienna. So I will send the next question. Have you ever had any problem or issue with your flat or your landlord? I hope you see the second question. I hope you don't have any problem with your flat or landlord, but in the past, it's important for us to understand if you need any support. It's why we organize these webinars, that you can understand the structure better. And the next question, the third question is, we organize this webinar about renting a flat, renting and housing in Austria. But if it is interesting for you to understand how to buy a flat or a house in Austria, I know most of you guys are really very new in Austria, but maybe in the next 1 or 3 years, you can also imagine to buy or invest in Austria. It was the third question. If it is interesting for you to buy a flat or house in Austria in the coming 1 or 3 years. By the way, I am also checking in the chat room if someone's written something. Floridsdorf is not Lower Austria, it's Vienna. It was a question, I guess, yeah. Thank you, Magdalena. You are faster. So, thank you for all of your answer for my opinion poll. Here are my contact details again, which you have already received probably on the invitation. I don't want to take so much of your time. Today is the webinar day with our 2 experts, and I'm also excited what they are going to explain us. You can write down your questions in the chat room at the end, and they will try to answer some of the common questions in the following days. You will receive the presentation per email as well, and also visit our website. You will find more information about this webinar. So it is time to leave the stage to our experts, starting with Ahmet Turan Damar. Ahmet, the stage is yours. You can take over the control of the presentation and share your screen if it's possible.
So, hello everyone, welcome to Austria, to this beautiful country. My name is Ahmet Turan Damar. I'm the owner of Damar Real Estate, and since I'm working a lot with expats, Mr. Atlan and Ecoplos, thank you for that, asked me to talk about this very important topic. So, one of the main questions, where to rent? Renting near a public transport, preferably metro or train station, is really important because it is super easy to get from place to place, especially in Vienna. You can get from one end to the other end in 20 minutes. It is also really affordable. An annual ticket for the Viennese public transportation costs only 365 euros. This is €1 per day. So there's also an annual ticket that includes Lower Austria and Vienna for 860 euros per year. Districts. You may prefer some districts over others. If you look, for example, for greenery and lush trees, you might enjoy the 19th district, the 14th or the 13th. If you love being in the city center and well connected to international agencies, you'll probably love being on the underground one, we just call it E1, and wherever it passes. If you love a younger, hipper vibe, maybe the 4th or the 7th is for you. So you see, every district of Vienna has unique offerings, And speaking to a realtor or a friend maybe will help finding out which district might be best for you.
But sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but maybe
Yes, please.
first, is it possible that you make your screen a little bit bigger and you are on the first slide? Maybe you forgot to click on the to the
I
second
actually
slide.
am not in. I thought I'm not in the first slide anymore. I'm still in the first slide?
Yes, in the shared screen, yes.
Okay, that's a problem. I'm sorry. I have to get out of here.
Yeah.
1 second.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we are on the second one now.
Yeah.
But is it the whole screen?
No, we are just seeing a part of the presentation. It's not a problem. I think the people are seeing, but if it's possible, you can make it a bigger screen.
Is it better now?
It didn't change.
All right. I'm sorry.
But no
I'm new to
problem.
this.
If you click on the right screen, it's better. Now you are on the second slide and you can enjoy your
Give me 1
presentation.
second. Maybe I can do it different. What about now?
Better.
Ah!
Bigger and better, but yeah, on the second page.
Yeah,
Thank you, Pam.
That's perfect.
Thank you. So I was talking about houses. If you prefer renting houses, you should look for the other districts, because in the inner city there are mainly apartments. Those apartments in buildings, we have two categories mainly. We call them Altbau, which is old building translated, or Neubau, which means new building. But don't get confused. If a building from 1960 is considered as a Neubau, as a new building before the law, because buildings built before 1953 are Altbau, and every building built after that is a Neubau. Why is that so important? Because the rents in Altbaus are regulated and cannot exceed a specified amount. So in general, that means that Altbaus are more affordable, but there are pros and cons, like always. The pros are maybe high ceilings, more affordable rent, like I told before, and the potentially charming Viennese flair. But the cons of those high ceilings can be that there are higher heating costs, and because maybe of little to no insulation. All the windows may also not block out noise or keep the warm or the cold inside. An energy certificate, which is called in German Energieausweis, is an important indicator which can tell you how energy efficient the flat is. And every landlord has to provide one. So the con of those Altbaus is also that there are a lot of competitors want them. So how do we get an advantage over other applicants? You can write a short resume of yourself, describe who you are, what your hobbies are, who you're coming with. Do you have pets? Do you plan to have pets? You can even put a small picture of yourself and your family into the resume and send it with your application. Prepare your documents. Time is money, so you should have your documents by your hand and so that you can move as fast as possible. You should also get additional documents like KSV-Auszug, which is actually an info pass for tenants, which proves your financial status. They call it Schufa in Germany, for example. You could get a character reference. So all in all, the more information you give from yourself, the better is it for you, and so you get an edge over other applicants. Last but not least, if you send an email, please also call the realtor or the landlord, because imagine if there is a really nice flat and a lot of people want that, it might be that the landlord or the realtor gets 100 emails, and so you could be one of those 100 and not pointing out. Or you can also get a realtor to help you. Here I have a short overview over the prices in Lower Austria and Vienna. You can see that in Lower Austria, the prices are slightly more affordable And the gap between Lower Austria and Vienna is getting bigger as bigger the apartment gets. The average price for operating costs should be around 2.5. This is really important for you to know because at the end of the day, you as a tenant pay the operating costs. Here are some additional costs, which is and some important infos. Unlike in other countries, the deposit in Austria is around 3 to 6 times the monthly rent. And some apartments don't even provide a kitchen or lighting. So at the end of the day, you should be careful with your search because buying a new kitchen could be a fortune for you from the beginning with. Listing the rooms, numbers of rooms. A lot of people get confused because what counts as a room? In Austria, we list the total numbers of rooms. That means if an apartment has 3 bedrooms and 1 living room, we simply say that it's a 4-room apartment. And we don't count anterooms as a room, for example. If you want to leave the apartment earlier, you have to give at least a 3-month notice. And having a protocol at the beginning and the end of the lease is really, really important. I was hired to organize the handover of a flat in the first district once, but there was no handover protocol from the begin with. So I went there, and the guy from the property management who represented the owner said he is not taking the apartment back in the current condition. They claimed that the built-in cupboards were not there before, and that they have to be removed, which means a lot of costs, additional costs. The walls were painted in different colors, and he said that it had to be painted white and so on. So they are still arguing about the deposit, and it will be most probably end up in front of the court. A handover protocol at the beginning of the lease could have avoided that. Here I have a short summary of some of the most popular websites where you can search for properties. Wilhelm, Imoscout, and so on. These are the biggest ones. But you can of course also hire a realtor or a relocation agency to search for you. But you should be aware of the first customer principle. Since 2023, since July 2023, we have the first customer principle in Austria. That means the person hiring a realtor has to pay the commission. But this only applies to rentals. You still have to pay 3.6% if you buy a property. So if we're successful, how should we start a rental agreement? A handover protocol, I can say it often enough, is really important for the termination of the contract. You want to get your full deposit back. It has to have pictures of the current state. Starting the rental agreement is also important for energy-wise and insurance-wise. There is a web page called Durchblick.at where you can where you have an overview of all the energy providers and insurance providers, or you could also go simply to an insurance broker. You should really know the legal status of the apartment so you can start rights from begin with. Is it the Altbau? Is it a Neubau? And be really careful with the contract. The index, for example, the rights and your obligations. I have another example for that. A customer of mine who became one of my best friends at the end rented an apartment in the 9th district. It was in a really nice Altbau with a nice garden at the back of the house, usable for everyone in the house. But the usage of the garden was not in the contract of my friend. I gotta say that he and his family are super social and even organized barbecues and parties for everyone in the house. The landlord, who also lived in the house, didn't like that. Maybe because everyone in the house, mainly expats, paid too much for their apartment and didn't want them to talk to each other. And I told you guys before that Altbaus are regulated. So the landlord then contacted my friend and said he and his family can't use the garden anymore. But renting this place was mainly because of the garden. I found out that he was paying 200 euros per month for 3 years, too much. And we went to the Schlichtungsstelle together, which is the magistrate that deals with stuff like that. Long story short, he got around 80% of that back what he paid too much, and I found a really nice house with a garden in the 16th district for him. So it was a happy end for him at the end. So here we have additional counseling centers for tenants in Lower Austria and in Vienna. It's a Schlichtungsstelle. It's a magistrate that helps you to deal with it before it goes to the court. Then the Arbeiterkammer, which is a working chamber, is also helping you with legal advice. And then we have lawyers in district courts. They're also providing your information for you so that you can find the right way to solve your problem. Now I want to make a short jump to buying properties. The costs for buying properties in Austria are from 7 to 10% for the buyer. Why is there a gap of 3%? If a realtor is involved, you have to pay 10% because the realtor gets 3%. The realtor, unlike in other countries, in Austria works for both parties. That means there is no realtor for the buyer, no realtor for the seller. This is mostly one person who tries to negotiate between both parties and tries to make a positive deal. If you are thinking about buying in Austria right now, I can suggest you is the right time, because right now we have a good price performance ratio at the moment due to the crisis and the loan situation. It could be a nice time to buy. And again, location is important. With the right location, you can buy a property that can be worth 20%, 30% more in the next years. But you should get additional information about the property, about the rights and obligations. You can get these from the municipal authorities like the magistrate or the court. You can also get them from the property management, like the protocol of the annual meeting. These informations are really important, so you can see what kind of costs will be caused by the building in the coming years. Here again, the seller has to provide an energy certificate, and I would highly suggest you to ask a realtor for support, because you won't pay additional commission if a realtor is already included. The two realtors will just split the commission. If you got additional questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Here are my contact numbers, contact details. I really thank you for your attention, and I would like to pass over to my colleague, Ms. Brandstetter.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ahmed.
So I'm going to share my screen now so that you can see my presentation for today. My name is Magdalena Brandstetter. I'm partner and co-head of the Will Practice Group at Dorda Attorneys at Law. We are a full-service law firm located in Vienna, but giving advice for whole Austria. We are among 95 lawyers doing all aspects of law in Austria. So also if you have any other questions except for renting and buying property in Austria, you can also contact us. The good thing, if you are a tenant in Austria, it's not working. It's working. The good thing, if you are a tenant in Austria, Austrian Tenancy Act and Austrian Tenancy Law is very tenant friendly. So you have a lot of rights, and it doesn't matter what is written in the lease agreement. The law in favor of tenant is mandatory and prevails over most of provisions in lease agreements. So everything which I'm telling you now is mandatory. And if you have signed a lease agreement where it's written differently, it's normally null and void. So you can rely on the legal status of your lease agreement. As regards the content for today, I'm telling you a little bit about Austrian Tenancy Act. Real estate brokers, we already had rental offers from a legal point, and not what Ahmed has already told us regarding handover and all the other stuff. Cost and start during the rental period, main rent increases, rights obligation during the lease term, entry of other persons into the lease agreement if you want to pass your lease agreement on to friends, family members, whatsoever. Termination of rental agreements, counseling centers for tenants. Ahmed and myself have talked about this before, so I have other counseling centers then he has mentioned, and then a short excursion into investment and ownership in Austria, but honestly, only very short. If you have any questions, you can ask the questions via the chat function. So please feel free to do this also for Ahmed's and Aslan's part. And after our short presentation, we will try to answer as many questions as possible. So, Austrian tenancy law. Okay, there's already the first question. I think we will do the presentation, finish it, and do it afterwards, if this is fine for everybody. So in Austria, you have the Austrian Civil Code and the Austrian Tenancy Act. The Austrian Tenancy Act contains the regulations for tenancy agreements, but not for all kind of premises and not sufficiently. So if there's no regulation in the Austrian Tenancy Act, you can have a look into the Austrian Civil Code and you will most likely find the regulation there. The Austrian Tenancy Act, as I've said before, is very tenant-friendly. This is quite political in Austria. So like consumers, also tenants are very much protected by the Austrian Tenancy Act. And like I also said before, the Austrian Tenancy Act is mandatory. So every regulation in the lease agreements which is against the Austrian Tenancy Act is null and void. Besides the quite tenant-friendly Austrian Tenancy Act, there's also a lot of case law from our highest courts giving tenants much more rights than stipulated in the Austrian Tenancy Act. So there are a lot of different and additional regulations in favor of tenants. There are more than, I think, 15 decisions already dealing with standard leases and telling that more or less all of the clauses in standard lease agreements, which are not in line with the Austrian Tenancy Act or the Austrian Civil Code, are null and void. So you don't only have to look into the Austrian Tenancy Act, but also be aware of Austrian highest court decisions, which is also very, very tenant-friendly. If you want to rent, you first have to look if the Austrian Tenancy Act is fully applicable, which is for old buildings, Wiener Zinshäuser and all the other old buildings made erected before the end of the Second World War, or if it's a new building. The main difference from a tenant perspective is that for the old buildings, you have rent, or the landlord may not request any rent, but the rent amounts which are allowed by law are stipulated by law. If you have a new building, more or less you can agree on every rent which is willing, or which somebody is willing to pay. And Ahmed have already shared the main rents in Vienna and Upper Austria. If you have a higher rent in an old building, then there are certain ways to also get your money back. Like Ahmed has already mentioned, in Vienna it's the Schlichtungsstelle, and outside of Vienna it's the district courts where you can go to. The proceedings free of charge for tenants, so you can just go there and claim that the rent is too high or operating costs are too high, and then the respective authorities doing the procedure for you, and you get the money back, and you get also 4% interest additionally to the amount. So it's at the moment much better than keeping it on the bank account, paying a high rent and then claiming it back afterwards. Yeah, and it's not working. Then as regards rental agreements, there are certain draft rental agreements in the internet, but still we do not recommend using everything of this because not all of the samples in the internet are quite good. Important for you as a tenant is, of course, the contracting parties. We have several cases where the contemplated landlord, according to the lease agreement, is not the real estate owner. So if this is not the case, you have to double check and ask why the person mentioned as landlord is entitled to give the property to you. Sometimes it's the husband or the mother of the person who is really letting it. So you have to be quite careful that the right landlord is stated in the lease agreement. Also regarding the rental object, you have to be quite careful regarding the usable space, and if you want to also rent furnishing, maybe it's furnished when you visited it, you also have to be quite careful that everything is listed in the lease agreement which you already want to rent for the whole leasing period. Otherwise, it's more or less market standard in Austria that apartments are not furnished, but sometimes they're also furnished apartments. And then you also have to look at this. And like Ahmed have also mentioned, if you want to use some other spaces in the building, you have to be quite careful that it's written in the lease agreement that you as tenant are also entitled to use the garden or the rooftop terrace or the swimming pool or whatever. Duration of the agreement is also important for you. Under the Austrian Tenancy Act, leases for apartments have to be at least for 3 years. If the period is shorter, then the term is invalid and the landlord cannot force you to move out after the end of term. So you as a tenant are still protected, landlord cannot move you out. And if it's shorter than 3 years, you have a lease agreement for unlimited term and you can move out considering the termination periods mentioned in the lease agreements. Like I've mentioned before, regarding the rent amount, if the Austrian Tenancy Act is applicable in full, the rent amount is restricted by law. And also the operating costs which can impose to you are also stipulated by law. So landlord is not entitled to pass on every and all operating costs, but only the operating costs listed or mentioned in the Austrian Tenancy Act. Other important regulations in these agreements are regarding maintenance and liability, which will be in the next slides, subletting and transfer of rental agreement, and the security deposit. Yeah, like real estate brokers, we have already mentioned. So if you're not hiring the real estate broker normally has to be paid by landlord, which is quite new in Austria. Which was before in Germany the same, and then also Austria adopted to this, and I think it's quite good for tenants that they don't have to pay the real estate. Rental offers, from a legal point of view, we see it quite often that people sign a lot of rental offers. Like Ahmed has mentioned before, if you want to move into a very nice apartment, maybe there are 50, 60 or 100 people who want to move in. And it's sometimes quite tough to find a nice apartment, and maybe then you're visiting 5 or 6 or 7 apartments and you want to lease it, get one of them, you're signing maybe a lot of rental offers. This is not good because from a legal perspective, every legal offer is binding. And if you have signed a lot of rental offers and maybe 2 or 3 landlords accept your rental offer, then in principle, they can force you to pay at least the rent for the term mentioned in the rental offer. In most cases, landlords say, well, okay, we have so many other interests for the apartment, let's find somebody else, but you don't have any legal right for this. And we see it in a lot of cases that the landlords say, well, okay, of course, there are a lot of other interests, but you have signed the rental offer, I have now accepted it, and I want at least 1 month's rent or whatsoever for letting you out of the lease agreement. So please be very careful when you sign the rental offer. And also if the rental offer doesn't say it's valid for 7 or 14 days or whatsoever, then it's normally valid for a longer period or invalid period, unlimited term. So you're bound to the offer as long as the landlord doesn't say yes or no. So please be also very careful that you're not signing more than 1 binding offer. And if so, that the binding period, which is mentioned in the rental offer, is not longer than, I don't know, 7, 14 days or 4 weeks. But keep in mind that there need to be a fixed binding period, which is also, quite important in the rental offer, that the minimum content is included, contracting parties, rental object, rent, and operating costs, and of course the usable space and area and the term. When I myself was signing the rental offer for the apartment in which I'm now living, it said for unlimited term, which was wrong. So I was also quite disappointed, but we have to double check this twice because now I have a lease agreement for limited term. And in Austria as a tenant, you have no right for prolongation. So if your fixed term lease agreement ends after 3 years or 5 years or whatsoever, you don't have any right to prolong, and you have to move out if you do not agree with the landlord. And what most landlords say, well, okay, you're a good tenant, you always paid your rent, you're not noisy, you're not disturbing the other neighbors, but I want to increase your rent if you want to stay in the apartment. So lease agreements for limited term are quite common in Austria, but please keep in mind that you have no right for prolongation, and most landlords use the opportunity to increase the rent after end of term if you want to stay in your apartment. Yeah, as regards costs, at the start of the rental period, a security deposit is market standard in Austria. From a legal perspective, it can be up to 6 monthly rents. Normally, it's somewhere between 3 to 6 rents. Broker commission, in most cases, not at the moment. And then you have the rent structure, which normally consists of the main rent, the operating costs, and you're normally also obliged to conclude a household insurance for the whole term, which is also in your favor, because if something happens in the apartment, then it's covered by insurance. Yeah, if you have a new building, you don't have any rent restrictions by law. For the old buildings, which are mainly in Vienna, you have the restrictions by law referring to the reference value with fixed amounts, which are increased by law. And then you have surcharges or discounts depending on where the apartment is located within Vienna or wherever else. So if it's close to an underground station, close to a school, something like that. And also surcharges or discounts depending on where the apartment is in the building, if you have a balcony or not, if you have sunlight or not. So all the stuff which makes the apartment better or worse are considered by calculating the rent. But this only applies to old buildings. Possibilities of rent increases has been quite intensively discussed in the last 2 years because of inflation. So if you have a lease agreement in an old building, then also the indexation is regulated by law. If you have a lease agreement in a new building, then normally the indexation is linked to the consumer price index. And you have a clause in a lease agreement saying, well, landlord is entitled to increase normally once per year based on the increase or decrease, which you normally don't have, of the consumer price index. There was one case law decision saying that more or less most of the indexation clauses in lease agreements might be invalid, but the highest court has not said to what extent. So at the moment, we assume that more or less it's also possible for landlords to increase the rent in new erected buildings, but if not, we will of course inform you. And then you have a lot of rights and obligations, which are normally stipulated in the lease agreement, if not, then stipulated by law. You as a tenant are normally obliged to do the standard maintenance works, but not structural reparation works. So if there's serious damages of the building, normally it's the obligation of landlord. So roof structure, windows and stuff like that is normally the responsibility of landlord. If you have any damage, you have to inform the landlord or the facility manager if you don't have the contact details of the landlord about that. Changes to the rental object are normally also quite important. So if you want to do any construction works within the apartment, you must obtain the consent of landlord. For example, if you want to exchange the kitchen or combine the kitchen with the living room, then you have to ask for the consent of landlord. If you are doing useful expenses, and it's always good to talk about this with landlord before, then you can also agree on a compensation. And in old buildings, and if it's useful, investment, then you have also a legal claim after the end of the lease agreement. Liability for damages. Of course, if you make any damage in the apartment, you must pay for it. The security deposit at the beginning of the lease agreement, which you have given to landlord, shall also safeguard the landlord if you damage anything, and you normally also have the household insurance for this. Subletting, if you want to sublease parts of your apartment, this is normally allowed by law and also in the lease agreement. If you want to sublease the whole apartment, it's normally forbidden and also reason for termination for landlord. Pets. There were some highest court decisions saying if it's a pet which is normally kept in an apartment, you're allowed to keep it in the apartment even if the lease agreement says no. So at the moment, also dogs and cats are allowed in the apartment without the consent of landlord. But of course, if the animals do any damage to the apartment, you have to pay for this. Use as a secondary residence. So if you have two households, maybe in the country where you're coming from and in Vienna, you have to be quite careful. If it's a really secondary residence, so mainly for holidays, landlord may terminate the lease if you're not entitled to do so under the lease agreement. Yeah, entry of other persons into the rental agreement. So if you want to pass the lease agreement on, maybe to your co-worker when you're leaving the country or stuff like that, this is normally only allowed with the consent of landlord if you had not agreed otherwise. Termination of lease agreements, like mentioned before, Austrian Tenancy Act is very, very tenant-friendly. So landlords may only terminate the lease agreements for the reasons stated in the Austrian Tenancy Act, which is mainly if you don't pay rent, operating costs, make disadvantaged use of the apartment, or sublet the whole apartment. And even in such case, landlord may not terminate the lease agreement by written letter, but landlord must go to court, and court has to check if the reason for termination is really fulfilled or not. So also if your landlord wants to terminate the lease just with simple letter, this is not sufficient. You must go to court. You will also get the presentation afterwards. So you can then read this. These are also additional counseling centers for tenants, which are quite helpful. So you can contact them. They're free of charge normally for you as a tenant, and they're very well informed also in the case law, which is quite complicated in Vienna, Austria, because there's so many different decisions. And then a very, very short excursion to investment and ownership in Austria. In principle, every individual or company is allowed to acquire ownership in Austria. We have a public land register, so if you want to know who's the owner of a certain property, you can go to a notary, lawyer, real estate broker, also to court and get an extract from the land register where you can see who's the registered owner. For the registration of ownership, you need a written purchase agreement and the signatures need to be notarized, which causes additional costs, but not that high, so it's fine. In Austria, we have 9 federal states and 9 land transfer acts. So every Austrian federal state has its own land transfer act with different regulations regarding requirements for ownership. For foreigners, for secondary homes, and for agricultural and forestry land. So you need to check in which federal state you want to acquire ownership, and then you have to check if there are any approvals necessary or not. For example, also for Austrian citizenships, it's not allowed, or I would not be allowed to buy any forestry land because I'm not a farmer. So there are certain restrictions, or for buying a skiing home in Kitzbühel if it's not dedicated as secondary home. So also for Austrian and European citizens, there are certain restrictions. And for people coming from states which are not members of the European Union, you normally need a land transfer approval. And then you have also several taxes and charges, of course, if you want to acquire ownership. Yeah. Which is a little bit more detail. And then the restrictions. Yeah. Thank you. I think we have now some questions in the chat.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. We have a couple of questions. I will start from some of the questions you have already answered during your presentation, but anyway, I will wait. The first question is from Pam. I will be moving out of my current flat in July and then staying with a friend for 2 months before I move out of the country. How do I handle the Meldebestätigung?
So normally if you're staying with your friend, you would in principle also have to apply for a Meldebestätigung. And normally it should be possible for your friend to sign it and to present it together with the lease agreement of your friend to the authority.
And maybe just one small information from my side. If you move in or move out in a new flat or from a new flat, in 3 days you have to sign in or sign out from the Meldeamt.
Yeah.
Yes.
On the new address. Next question is about non-residents in EU, residents of Ukraine. If it is possible to invest in houses in Austria. You talked about it, but maybe a couple of words again.
Yeah, so normally you would have to apply for a land transfer approval. There, depending in which federal state of Austria you want to invest, there are different requirements. And for example, in Vienna, you can avoid the necessity of land transfer approval by two-tier structure of 2 European companies. Then you are exempt from the land transfer approval, but still you have to check in which federal state you are and which are the requirements for the respective federal state. But in principle, you would have to apply for an approval.
And the next question is about when you change your name due to marriage after signing a contract.
So it's not necessary to update the contract. There's no need for, because you're the same person, only your name have changed. If you own real estate, then we strongly recommend to register your new name in the land register, which is quite easy, can be done in the court or by a notary, but for the leases it's not necessary. But of course it would make sense to inform landlord so that he just have as your actual contact details.
The next question from Austria. When I rented my apartment, I first sent a rental offer and then they sent me the contract to sign. So I hadn't seen the contract before I sent the offer. But if I don't like the terms of the contract, can I not retract my offer?
Depending on, so if the lease contract is not in line with the rental offer, then of course you can inform them and say you have to adapt it because both parties have signed in the rental offer. If what is written in the lease agreement is in line with law, then you have no possibility. And if you just don't like it, and if it's not regulated in the lease offer or the law, I would tell them that it's not in line and try to renegotiate it. But of course, it makes totally sense to see the lease agreement before you sign it or sign also the lease offer.
Another question is about, if I translate correctly, Abschaffung der Grundbuch, is the abolition of the land register, I guess, if I translate it correctly. Would you please share some information about the new rules and conditions for the Abschaffung des Grundbuches? Those who signed their purchase contract in February, March 2024.
Yeah, I think it's not about the deletion of the land register, but it refers to the Wohnpaket, which now exempt buyers from land registration fee. when you start the registration process after June. So then you are, in some cases, exempt from the registration fee for the land register, which amounts to 1.1% of the purchase price, depending on what has been agreed with the seller, because normally the seller only gets the purchase price once the buyer has been registered. It's possible to start the registration process later, but normally, if you're obliged to, then it's not.
I think that you have to, the contract has to be signed after the 31st of March.
Yeah, so for
This
people,
is the line, the deadline. Everything before is except from this.
Yeah.
Next question is about some mistakes and some doubtful claims about Betriebskostenabrechnung. What's the best way to deal with this situation? A detailed and long question, but if you can answer the question so in a general way, maybe interesting for the others.
So under Austrian law, every landlord has to present you the Betriebskostenabrechnung, so the overview of operating costs for the last year until 30 June. So you have the right to also inspect this overview of the operation costs for the last years. And if it's not in line with the lease agreement, you don't have to pay it. If the facility manager or your landlord is not willing to adapt it, still would not pay the amount which is not in line with the lease agreement. And if this also not working in Vienna, we have the Schlichtungsstelle, which is MA50, which is also dealing with this. And outside of Vienna, you have to go to the district court claiming your amounts back. And of course, if you don't want to go to Schlichtungsstelle or district court in the first step, then you can also go to a lawyer. And sometimes it's very helpful if the landlord or facility manager receives a lawyer's letter. Then sometimes knowing that you already seeked for legal advice and can be very helpful.
No one likes lawyers that letters.
No, and nobody likes lawyers, but it's fine.
Okay, next question. When I want to sign my contract, they ask me to send the deposit money. Is it normal that they want the deposit before signing the contract? And are we already legally protected because of the binding of a response?
Yes, it's quite standard because otherwise the landlord would have to claim the deposit if he has not received it at the latest at the time of signing of the lease agreement. So from my experience, this is quite market standard. And of course, you can then claim it back. Normally, you transfer it to the account of the facility manager who is responsible for the whole billing.
Next question, what's the procedure of reimbursement for useful expenses for tenants?
Yeah, you have certain regulations for this in the Austrian Tenancy Act. For old buildings, for new buildings, you have to agree on this with landlord. Normally it says law stipulated what are useful expenses in law in the Austrian Tenancy Act. For example, a new floor, stuff like that. So not only painting the walls. And then there's a certain way to calculate it. So mainly depending on when did you do the investment and what is now the market value of the investment which you have done 10 or 5 years ago.
Perfect.
Question from Marco. I want to rent an apartment and the lady told me to pay 240 euros for a contract. Is it the landlord lady? Is it normal to pay for it, for the contract?
Sometimes you see it, but if it's a sample lease agreement, it's also forbidden by case law that the tenant has to pay for the drafting of the contract.
I will inform my landlord about I noticed a recent problem that a water faucet in the bathtub is not working as it should. Hot water is not coming out. Should I be careful?
Yeah, I think, you should of course inform him about the things which is working. And if it's not working for a longer period, you also have a legal right for rent reduction, which is stipulated in law, depending on if this is your only bathroom and you can take a shower whatsoever, and then the landlord normally is more willing to repair it if you reduce the rent.
About the site cost, taxes, etc., for buying a land in Vienna or Lower Austria.
So you have to pay 3.5% land transfer tax and 1.1% registration fee if you're not exempt by the newest legislation.
1.2% for the
mortgage
loan.
if you have any. Yeah.
Mortgages.
And also want to register to build a house on a property. Yeah, normally you just need to apply for a building permit by the competent authority.
And the notar has also to be paid. It's around 1%. And if a realtor is included, 3.6% for the realtor.
Yeah.
The guy from rental agency has to pay 1,500 euros bribe to give me an apartment. Can I contact someone about it?
That's a lot of money.
Yeah. So I think you can contact Wirtschaftskammer Österreich.
Definitely.
You will find the link on the presentation of Magdalena and Ahmed as well. Once we give all the information and presentation online on our website, then you can contact directly which customer protection, I guess.
Yes.
Called, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And otherwise, you can contact a lawyer, or Magdalena is also here. You can also find the contact details of Magdalena.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
A Spanish citizen, can I buy a house by requesting a mortgage credit from a local bank?
In principle, you can do, but since the regulations for private loan agreements by banks are quite strict at the moment in Austria, you need to have quite a high equity portion and not a very long term for the loan agreement. It's normally easier to not finance it at the moment with an Austrian bank. Some of our clients are now using German banks. So
yes.
Yeah,
that's what I want
because
to say.
German banks are not that strictly regulated like Austrian banks are at the moment. But in principle, yes, of course, you can apply for it.
There is this regulation called KIM, and since it's in power, you have to have at least 20% on capital.
Yeah.
Plus, your income level has to be pretty high so that you get a loan in Austria. So it's really pretty hard to get one. And the credit condition, the loan conditions are also not that attractive right now.
Yeah, that's true. So
next question is, soon I will start looking for a couple of apartments. I have an Austrian settlement permit, but my wife is coming with an Icelandic permit, which will expire in a few months. Could it be an issue while making a rental application?
No. This is no problem for the landlord, actually. Most of them are not looking at your permits, and you normally need also apartments to prolong your permit, so it should be no problem.
And I know in some cases for such applications, residence permit applications from abroad, the people has to pay or sign the contract before they are coming or getting the permit. That's why it shouldn't be a problem. It's normal to ask to sign the contract and all other documents online.
Yes, sometimes you see it. Yeah, but if the lease agreement is not signed in handwritten form, then any fixed term is invalid. So still the landlord cannot enforce the term if it's not signed in handwriting or via qualified electronic signature. So it's good for you as a tenant.
I think from Natalie, I will rent a new apartment in a new building that is still in construction. They told me that should be finished in June. So I will notify my recent landlord about the moving. Should we wait until we really know now that the new building is ready, or just trust that I can use in June?
Thing is, normally you have a termination period of 3 months in your rental agreement. And normally it has to be in written form via registered letter. So now you're already too late, because if you send it now, then you have May, June, July. And if the landlord is not willing to let you out of the contract earlier because he has found a new tenant quite quickly, you have to at least pay for July. So the longer you wait, the more rent you have to pay. The other thing is, if the other apartment is not finished by June, then you have another problem, but then you have compensation claims against your new landlord. So if you have to stay at the hotel and all the stuff like that has to be reimbursed by your new landlord. But if the apartment should be finished in June, then it should normally be possible to go there, visit it, and somehow see if it's really feasible that the apartment will be finished in June or not.
There's also one thing that a lot of people don't know. It is really common in Austria that from the start of your contract, you cannot leave the contract for 1 year. That means you have to wait 1 year plus 3 months notice. That means 15 months you are bound. You should know that. Please.
I'm sorry, please go ahead. This is also regulated by law, so it's written in the Tenancy Act.
Yes.
And the last question of today of our webinar, can you quickly explain again how should we start the procedure to claim that we pay too much rent? At least the first step, who were to approach?
So in Vienna, you have the Schlichtungsstelle, MA50, which is responsible for this. Outside of Vienna, you have the district courts. If you have rented in Vienna, an apartment which must be located, of course, in Vienna, then you just can contact the Schlichtungsstelle MA50. You find an email address on their homepage and also a number, and you just can give them a call. And outside of Vienna, you have the district courts, and you can also call the district court to normally have a so-called Amtstag, so a day per week where you can just go and seek legal advice, and then they will also tell you about the next steps.
Yes.
I also wrote in the chat room, Magistrat, Schlichtungsstelle. But as I said, you will find the presentation in a couple of days on our website, and you can also contact both of our experts directly to get more information on our service.
So I think you exist.
Always there for a service.
Yes.
I think we answered all of the questions. Thank you very much, Magdalena and Ahmed, and to everyone who took time for this interesting webinar and about this difficult subject. You have the contact details of Magdalena Brandstetter and Ahmed Tamar for your specific questions, and you can contact them directly. And for all other subjects and questions, please don't hesitate to contact us, contact me. As Ecoplus International, we will do our best to help and support you and suggest you solutions about your questions. I think it's time to say goodbye for now. See you again on one of our next webinar or on our event and meetups. Thank you to everyone for your time again, and have a nice Tuesday afternoon. Enjoy the beautiful spring day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And enjoy this beautiful country.
Yes, definitely.